After I cheated, my husband never laid a hand on me again. From that moment on, we spent the next 18 years living under the same roof like strangers who just happened to share an address. Everything finally came crashing down years later during a routine physical, not long after I retired, when my doctor said something that made my entire world cave in right there in the exam room. "Dr. Collins, how do my results look?" I asked, sitting in the sterile silence of her office while my fingers twisted the strap of my purse without me even noticing. Sunlight slipped through the blinds and painted neat, pale stripes across the spotless white walls. Dr. Collins, a woman in her early 50s with kind eyes and gold-rimmed glasses, sat quietly in front of her computer. At that moment, she was focused on the screen, her forehead slightly creased as she studied my chart. She glanced up at me, then back down again, clicking through my electronic records. "Mrs. Carter, you're 58 now, correct?" she asked gently, though her calm tone made my stomach tighten. "Yes," I replied, doing my best to keep my voice steady. "I just retired. Is something wrong? Did you find anything?" She paused for a few seconds, then looked at me with an expression that was hard to read. "Laura," she said carefully, "I need to ask you something personal. Have you and your husband had a normal, intimate relationship over the years?" My face instantly burned with heat. That question hit like a needle straight into the most painful and well-hidden wound I'd been carrying for the past 18 years. It almost felt ridiculous. David and I had been married for 30 years, yet for more than half of that time we'd lived like total strangers. It all started back in the summer of 2008. I was 40 years old and so was he. Our son Ryan had just left for college, and suddenly the house felt empty in a way I wasn't prepared for. It wasn't empty physically, but emotionally and psychologically, it felt hollow. David and I had been college sweethearts. We got married right after graduation and slipped easily into a comfortable, predictable life. He worked as an engineer at a large manufacturing company, and I taught English at the local high school. Our life was steady and quiet, like a glass of lukewarm water. No chaos, but no spark either. Then, when I turned 40, I met Daniel. He was the new art teacher at the school, about 5 years younger than me, with faint lines around his eyes that deepened whenever he smiled. He kept fresh flowers in a vase on his desk, hummed unfamiliar tunes while grading papers, and offered his umbrella to anyone caught in the rain. Being around him reminded me of the person I used to be 20 years earlier, the one who cried over poetry and stared at the moon lost in thought. One afternoon, Daniel walked into my classroom holding a watercolor painting of a hillside covered in wildflowers. "Laura, what do you think of this one?" he asked. "It's beautiful," I said honestly, because it really was. "Then it's yours," he replied, handing it to me. "I think you're like the flowers in this painting," he added, quiet on the surface but full of life underneath. That single sentence unlocked a part of my heart I thought I had sealed off for good. After that, we started talking more, chatting in the faculty lounge, walking through the small school garden, and grabbing coffee at a nearby cafe. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I couldn't seem to stop myself. Being seen, truly seen and admired, felt like rain soaking into dry, cracked ground. David eventually noticed something was different. "You've been working late a lot lately," he said one evening from his usual spot on the couch. "There's just a lot going on at school," I replied, avoiding his eyes as I hurried toward the bedroom. He didn't argue or push for answers. He just stayed there, bathed in the quiet glow of the television. That silence filled me with guilt, but strangely, it also made me more reckless. Everything came apart one weekend. I told David I had a faculty workshop to attend, but instead, I had planned to spend the day sketching with Daniel in the countryside. We sat by a lake for hours talking about art, poetry, and life. As the sun started to dip, Daniel suddenly reached for my hand. "Laura, he began, but his words were cut off by a voice. "Mom!" I snapped my head around. Ryan stood a short distance away, his face pale and furious, and beside him was David. My husband's face was blank, but his eyes were locked on me. My mind went completely numb. Ryan had come home from college early to surprise me. When I didn't answer my phone, he asked David to drive him around to my usual places to look for me. That's how they found me by the lake with Daniel. "Home," David said quietly before turning and walking back toward the car. The drive back was suffocatingly silent. Ryan sat in the back seat, radiating disappointment and anger, and every second felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Once we got home, David told Ryan to go to his room. Then he sat down on the living room sofa, lit a cigarette, and finally looked at me. "How long?" he asked calmly, which somehow terrified me more than yelling ever could. "I'm sorry," I said as I dropped to my knees in front of him, tears pouring down my face. "I was wrong. I know I was wrong." "I asked how long," he repeated evenly. 3 months, I sobbed. "But nothing happened. I swear we just talked." "Enough," he said, crushing the cigarette and standing up. "Laura, I'm giving you 2 options," he continued. "Option 1, we get divorced and you walk away with nothing. Option 2, we stay married, but from this day forward we're just roommates." I stared at him, completely stunned. "Ryan has his whole life ahead of him," he said coldly, as if negotiating a business deal. "I don't want this affecting him, and a divorce wouldn't look good for your job either. So this is your choice," he finished. "If you don't accept it, we divorce." I agree," I whispered, my voice shaking. That was it. He went into our bedroom, grabbed his pillow and a comforter, and tossed them onto the couch. "From now on I sleep out here," he said. "Your life is your own, but in front of our son and everyone else, you will act like a normal wife." That night, I lay alone in our king-sized bed, listening to him shift and turn on the couch in the other room. I had expected shouting, accusations, maybe even violence. But none of that came. Instead, he shut me out completely. That's when I learned that some punishments are far crueler than divorce. The next morning, David went to work like nothing had happened. I called in sick, unable to face Daniel. I sent him one short message. "I'm sorry. We can't see each other anymore." He replied with a single word, "Okay." Just like that, my affair with Daniel ended, but so did my marriage. In the years that followed, David and I lived in a tense, frozen truce. He made coffee every morning but never spoke to me. He came home on time but stayed locked in his study until I fell asleep, only then returning to the couch. When Ryan came home for Christmas break, I asked him what he wanted for dinner, forcing cheer into my voice. He barely looked at me before muttering, "Whatever," and then shutting himself inside his room. That Christmas was brutally cold in every way that mattered. At dinner, the 3 of us sat there in silence, the only noise coming from a holiday movie playing softly on the television. "Ryan, have some more turkey," I said, reaching toward his plate and trying to sound normal. He pulled his plate back without looking up. "Dad, how are things at the firm?" he asked pointedly, completely ignoring me. "Fine," David answered shortly. "Good," Ryan said, setting his fork down. "I'm full. I'm going to my room." As I watched my son walk away, the tears came back before I could stop them. "Stop crying," David said flatly. "Save your energy. We're going to your mother's tomorrow." I wiped my eyes as a cold realization settled in. This was my life now, pretending to be a happy family for the outside world while living like strangers behind closed doors. The years passed, locking our relationship in place like something frozen in ice. In 2011, Ryan finished his master's degree and accepted a job in Chicago. With our son gone, the house felt even emptier and colder than before. I tried everything I could to fix what I had broken. I learned how to cook David's favorite meals, bought him thoughtful birthday gifts, and stayed up late with snacks waiting for him when he worked long hours. None of it mattered. He stayed distant, unmoved, like my efforts were hitting a solid wall and falling straight to the floor. "You don't have to do all this," he said one night, his voice cold and detached. "We're just acting. You understand that, right?" "But I want to make it up to you," I said, my voice catching in my throat. "Some things can't be fixed," he interrupted. "Laura, I gave you a respectable way out. Just live your life and don't make me regret my decision." In that moment, something finally clicked. He didn't hate me. He had buried that hatred so deep that it had hardened into something colder than anger. In 2013, Ryan married a sweet, kind woman named Emily. At the wedding, David and I stood next to each other, smiling, laughing, and giving speeches like the perfect couple. "Your parents have such a wonderful marriage," one guest said to us. David slipped his arm around my shoulders, his smile flawless and convincing. but his hand felt stiff and lifeless against my back, cold as stone. Later, once we were alone in the hotel room, he dropped his arm the moment the door closed. "That was exhausting, wasn't it?" he said with a sharp edge in his voice. "Yes," I replied, sitting down on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by how ridiculous it all felt. "David, how much longer do we have to keep pretending like this?" "Until we can't anymore," he said, taking off his jacket and lying down on the sofa. "I'm used to it." Those words, "used to it," cut straight through me like a knife. In 2015, our grandson Lucas was born. David gave the baby his name. With a grandchild in our lives, we suddenly had a few safe topics to talk about. We discussed Lucas's milestones, picked out toys for him, and even laughed together during video calls. "Lucas," I'd coo at the phone screen, completely smitten. "That kid looks just like Ryan did," David said one day from beside me. It was the first personal comment he'd made to me without being prompted in years. "Really?" I asked carefully, testing the moment. "Was Ryan this smiley as a baby?" "Yeah," he said with a nod, and then went quiet again. Even so, that brief exchange gave me a tiny spark of hope. I started to believe that maybe time really could heal things. Maybe there was still a chance for us. I was wrong. That Thanksgiving, Ryan's family came to stay with us. For once, the house felt warm, almost normal. "Mom, Dad, are you two doing okay? Health-wise, I mean," Emily asked sincerely. "We're great," I said with a smile that felt glued onto my face. "That's good," Emily said, looking between us. "Honestly, I've always admired you two, being married so long and still so in love." Before I could answer, Ryan slammed his fork onto his plate. "Mom, stop pretending," he said coldly. "Emily doesn't know, but I do. You two haven't been husband and wife for years. You're just putting on a show." The room went completely still. "Ryan," David warned quietly. "No, Dad, you stop too," Ryan said as he stood up. "I'm 28, not a kid. Do you have any idea how suffocating it's been watching you live like this? You think I couldn't see it?" Emily looked horrified and grabbed his sleeve. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "I'm sorry," Ryan said, turning to her. "I've been hiding this from you. My parents' marriage is a lie. They stayed together for appearances." "Ryan," I said as I stood up, tears spilling over. "Mom, don't cry," he said gently. "I know you regret it. I know you've been trying to make up for it all these years." Then he looked at David. "But what about Dad? Has he been happy? Have you ever thought about that?" I didn't have an answer. "What's the point of living like this?" Ryan asked, looking back and forth between us. "It would be better to just divorce and start over. Dad's only 47. You're only 47. You both still have a lot of life left." "That's enough," David said, standing up. "Finish your dinner." That Thanksgiving meal ended in heavy silence. Ryan's words stayed with me long after that night. He was right. What were we really doing besides slowly hurting each other? Still, I was terrified to ask for a divorce. I was scared of losing what little family I had left, and of losing David, even if all he offered me was distance and coldness. In 2017, I turned 50. The school threw a small celebration for me in the staff room. "Laura, how come your husband isn't here?" one of the younger teachers asked. "He's stuck at work," I said with a practiced smile, even as my chest ached. The truth was, David didn't even know it was my birthday. He hadn't acknowledged my birthday in years. When I got home that night, I saw a plate on the kitchen table with 2 pancakes still warm. "Eat," David said, stepping out of the kitchen. "They're for your birthday." I stared at the plate. They were my favorite blueberry buttermilk pancakes. Tears immediately filled my eyes. You remembered?" I asked quietly. "I just remember the date," he said evenly. "Don't read into it." But I couldn't help myself. It was the first thing he'd made for me in over a decade. "David," I cried. Is there any chance for us?" He stood there silently for a long time, so long I thought he wouldn't answer at all. "Laura," he finally said, "some things belong in the past for a reason." Then he turned and walked toward his study. "They'll get cold if you wait," he added. I sat at the table and ate every last bite of those pancakes. They tasted salty, and I couldn't tell if it was the batter or my tears. Our 30th wedding anniversary came in 2018. Ryan insisted we celebrate it. 30 years is the pearl anniversary, Mom. That's a big deal, he said. He made reservations at a nice restaurant. At dinner, Emily held Lucas while Ryan stood up with his glass raised. To Mom and Dad, he said, thank you for everything you've done over the past 30 years. May you always be this happy together. David and I clinked glasses and took a drink. Ryan, the truth is your mother and I, David began. Dad, I know, Ryan interrupted. But no matter what's happened between the two of you, Ryan continued, in my heart, you're still the two most important people in my life. David didn't respond. He just lifted his glass and quietly drank his wine. That night, once we were home, we returned to our familiar positions. Me alone in the bedroom, David stretched out on the couch. The closed door between us felt heavier than ever, a solid physical reminder of the distance that had separated our lives for decades. David, I called softly into the darkness. Yeah, his voice answered from the living room. 30 years, I said, my voice thin and shaky. Have you hated me for all that time? The silence dragged on so long it felt unbearable. I don't hate you, he finally said. I'm just tired. Tired. That word hurt more than hate ever could. I'm sorry, I whispered, tears sliding down the sides of my face. Don't say sorry, he snapped, his voice suddenly louder. It's all in the past. But was it really? When the pandemic hit in 2020, David and I were both retired and stuck inside the house together. In those months, we saw more of each other than we had in the entire decade before. We cooked meals side by side, watched the news, and tracked the rising case numbers together. For a brief moment, it almost felt like we were a real couple again. Don't forget your mask, he'd say before heading out to the grocery store. I'd stand in the doorway watching him leave, that small, everyday concern filling my chest with a fragile kind of hope. Maybe we could start over. I was wrong. One evening, I made a special dinner and opened a bottle of wine. What's the occasion? David asked as he sat down at the table. There isn't one, I said, pouring him a glass. I just wanted to have a nice dinner with you. He glanced at me, then took a slow sip. David, I said after taking a deep breath, can we really try again this time? He set his glass down and looked at me, a bitter smile touching his lips. Try again, he said quietly. Laura, do you think this is some kind of game where you can just hit reset? I know I was wrong, I began. You were, he cut in. Do you have any idea what these last 18 years have been like for me? Sleeping on that couch every night, listening to you breathe in the next room, asking myself why I kept doing this to myself? Then why didn't you divorce me? I cried. Because I didn't want to hurt Ryan. Because I didn't want to be the center of town gossip. Because I didn't want you humiliated at your job, he said, his eyes red. But you, did you ever once think about how I felt? Did you ever think about what it did to my heart seeing you with that man? I'm sorry, I said over and over. I'm so sorry. Stop saying that, he said as he stood up. Let's just keep things the way they are. It's fine. That night, I threw the entire dinner into the trash, along with the last bit of hope I'd been holding on to. By 2024, Lucas was 9 years old. Ryan and his family visited several times a year, and his energy brought life back into our quiet, empty house. Grandma, Lucas asked one afternoon as he climbed into my lap, what were you and Grandpa like when you were young? When we were young, I said, stroking his hair. Grandpa was very handsome and Grandma was very pretty. How did you meet? He asked. In college. I smiled. Grandpa chased Grandma for a long time before she finally gave in. Does Grandpa still like Grandma now? The question caught me completely off guard. Of course he does, I said with a tight smile. But I don't think Grandpa likes Grandma very much, Lucas said thoughtfully. He never holds your hand, and you don't sleep together. Lucas, Emily said gently as she walked over. We don't say things like that. I'm not lying, Lucas insisted. People who love each other hold hands and hug. All right, homework time, Ryan said quickly, guiding his son away. I stayed seated on the couch, my chest hollow and aching. If a 9-year-old could see it, then there was no denying the truth. In 2025, I turned 58. My old school district arranged a health screening for retired teachers, And I signed up for a full workup, blood tests, x-rays, and an ultrasound. You're in great shape, Mrs. Carter, the nurse said with a smile. Maybe a little anemic. Try eating more spinach. I took my results to my gynecologist, Dr. Collins. She studied my chart, her brows slowly tightening. Laura, I need to ask you something personal, she said as she looked up. Have you and your husband had a normal, intimate relationship over the years? The question made my face burn. Does that affect my checkup? I asked. It does, she said, pointing to the screen. I'm seeing some abnormal indicators. If you're comfortable, can you tell me more? I hesitated, then finally told her the truth. My husband and I haven't been intimate in 18 years. Dr. Collins looked surprised, then let out a slow breath. 18 years? She repeated, removing her glasses. Laura, do you understand the physical impact that can have? I don't, I admitted quietly. A prolonged lack of intimacy can cause hormonal imbalances, weaken the immune system, and even raise the risk of certain diseases, she explained gently. And emotionally, it takes a serious toll on your mental health. I stared down at my hands, feeling exposed and ashamed. Laura, may I ask why? She said softly. It's my fault, I blurted out. I betrayed him. She looked at me with sympathy and typed a few notes. I see, she said. Laura, I need to do a more detailed examination. Do you have time today? Yes, I answered immediately. Then come with me. I followed her into the exam room and lay back on the cold table. She moved the instrument slowly across my abdomen, her eyes locked on the monitor. Suddenly she froze. Laura, she said, her voice trembling just slightly, have you ever had any gynecological surgery? No, I said quickly, my heart starting to race. Never. Why? She didn't answer and continued the exam in silence. After what felt like forever, she set the instrument down. You can get dressed, she said. Let's talk in my office. Once I was seated, she handed me a cup of water. Laura, I need to tell you something, she said, taking a deep breath. The exam shows evidence that you've had surgery on your uterus. That's impossible, I said, my voice rising. I've never had surgery. The findings are very clear, she replied calmly. She pulled the images onto the screen. See this area here? That's scar tissue, and it's unmistakable. She paused, her expression growing more serious. And based on the location and pattern of the scarring, this surgery would have been done many years ago. She looked straight at me. Laura, are you absolutely certain you don't remember anything like this? My thoughts spun wildly. Surgery? When? How? Could it be a mistake? I asked, clinging to the last bit of hope I had. No, she said, shaking her head. The imaging is too clear. This isn't an error. Laura, Dr. Collins said gently, I think you should go home and think very carefully about this. If you can, maybe talk to a family member. I walked out of the hospital in a haze, her words echoing over and over in my head. Surgery. Scar tissue. Many years ago. Then suddenly a memory cut through the fog. Back in 2008, after everything with Daniel came out, I'd gone through a stretch of intense anxiety. I couldn't sleep and had been relying on sleeping pills just to get through the nights. One morning, I remembered waking up with a dull pain low in my abdomen. At the time, I brushed it off as cramps and didn't think twice about it. But now, the more I thought about it, the more unsettled I became. Could it really be connected? My unease grew until I couldn't sit with it anymore. I waved down a cab and rushed straight home. David was sitting in the living room, reading the newspaper. You're back, he said without lifting his eyes from the page. David, I said, standing directly in front of him, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth. He finally looked up, concern creasing his forehead. What is it? Back in 2008, I asked, my voice shaking. Did I have surgery? The color drained from his face instantly. He jumped to his feet, and the newspaper slipped from his hands to the floor. My heart dropped into my stomach. So it was true. I'd had an operation, and somehow I never even knew. What kind of surgery? I asked, barely holding myself together. Why don't I remember any of it? David turned away from me, his back rigid, his shoulders trembling like he was fighting something inside himself. Do you really want to know? He asked quietly. Tell me. I nearly screamed. He stood there in silence for a long moment. Just when I thought he wouldn't answer, he spun back around, his eyes raw and rimmed with red. "That year," he said shakily, "after I found out about your affair, one night you took too many sleeping pills. My breath caught. I rushed you to the hospital so they could pump your stomach," he continued. "While they were examining you, the doctor discovered you were pregnant." The room seemed to tilt, my head buzzing as if I might pass out. "Pregnant?" I whispered. I had been pregnant. Whose baby was it? I asked, barely able to form the words. David let out a broken, humorless laugh. "The doctor said you were about 3 months along," he said, tears finally spilling. "Laura, you can do the math. We hadn't touched each other in 6 months by then." My legs gave out and I collapsed onto the couch. 3 months pregnant. No intimacy in 6 months. The baby had been Daniel's. I had really been pregnant. And the baby? I asked in a hollow voice. "What happened to the baby?" David closed his eyes, tears streaming down his face. "I had the doctor perform an abortion," he said, his voice sounding like it was dragged up from somewhere dark and painful. "While you were unconscious, I signed the consent forms. I had them take the child." My mind went completely blank. I had been carrying Daniel's baby, and David had ended the pregnancy while I was unconscious. "How could you?" I whispered. "How could I?" David suddenly roared. "You actually have the nerve to ask me that? Laura, you were carrying another man's child. What did you expect me to do? Let you give birth to it? Let the whole world know my wife cheated on me and was pregnant with another man's baby?" His words cut deep, each one like a blade. "But that was a life," I said weakly. "A life." David scoffed. "When you were cheating, did you ever think about the life of our family? When you were with him, did you ever stop to think that Ryan needed a whole, stable home?" I had nothing to say. He was right. This was my fault. "Then why didn't you tell me?" I cried. "Why did you hide it from me?" "Tell you," David said, wiping his tears. "Tell you so you'd feel guilty? So you'd suffer? Or so you'd hate me?" "I wouldn't hate you," I said desperately. "You would," he cut in. "You'd hate me for taking away your right to be a mother. You'd hate me for making that decision while you were unconscious. So I didn't tell you. I thought you'd never find out. I thought this secret would fade and be buried with time. But I know now," I screamed, collapsing inward. "I know. Do you hear me? I know." David looked at me with an expression that broke my heart. Pain layered with exhaustion. "Yes," he whispered. "Now you know." He took a slow breath. "So what now?" he asked. "What do you want to do? Do you want to hate me? Do you want to forgive me?" He stepped closer, his voice rising with each question. "Or do you want to go find that man and tell him you once carried his child?" "No," he said suddenly, turning away. "Some things belong in the past for a reason. Just pretend you don't know. We can keep living like this." "I can't," I shouted. "I can't pretend anymore." "Then what do you want?" he snapped, spinning back around. "A divorce? Fine. Let's go right now and file the papers." I froze. A divorce? Was this really how it was going to end? Just then David's phone rang. He answered, and his face changed instantly. "What?" My heart seized. "Okay, we're on our way," he said before hanging up. He turned to me, his face pale. "Ryan was in a car accident," he said. "He's in surgery at the hospital." Everything else disappeared. I rushed after David as he bolted out the door. On the drive, his hands clamped around the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "He'll be okay," I said, my voice shaking. "Ryan will be okay." David didn't answer. He just pressed harder on the gas. At the hospital, Emily stood outside the emergency room holding Lucas, her face swollen from crying. "Mom, Dad," she sobbed when she saw us. "Ryan, he was hit by a car while saving a little kid who ran into the street." My knees nearly gave out. David caught me, then immediately went to speak with the surgeon. "Doctor," he said urgently, "how is my son?" The surgeon pulled down his mask, his expression grave. "He's critically injured," the doctor said. "We're doing everything we can." Then he hesitated. "There's something else you need to know." he continued. He's lost a lot of blood and needs an immediate transfusion. He has a rare blood type, and our supply is low. Rare, David repeated. What type? B negative, the doctor replied. It's uncommon. Does anyone in the family have that blood type? A direct donation would be the fastest option. David and I looked at each other. I'm O positive, David said. I'm O positive too, I said, my voice barely audible. The doctor flipped through Ryan's chart, then suddenly stopped. Wait, he said slowly. Genetically speaking, if both parents are type O, it's impossible for a child to have type B blood. The air in the hallway went ice cold. I turned to look at David. His face had gone completely white. Are you both certain you're type O? The doctor asked, confused. Certain, David repeated, his voice barely a whisper. The doctor frowned, about to say more. When the operating room doors burst open. We need a family member now, a nurse called urgently. The patient is critical. We have to get blood immediately. I'll contact the blood bank again. The surgeon turned to leave when Emily suddenly spoke up. Wait, she said. I'm B negative. You can use mine. The doctor paused, then nodded. All right. We'll prep you right away. Come with me. Emily followed him down the hallway, leaving Lucas behind with me. I held my grandson close, my entire body numb, like my nerves had shut down. David stood motionless nearby, his eyes fixed on the doors to the operating room. David, I said softly as I stepped closer to him. Don't, he said sharply. His voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. Not until Ryan is out of surgery. 2 long hours passed before the light above the operating room finally turned off. The surgeon stepped out, pulling down his mask. The surgery was successful, he said. He's stable for now, but he'll need close monitoring in the ICU. We all let out the breath we'd been holding. Emily came back soon after, pale and unsteady from giving blood. How's Ryan? She asked weakly. He's okay, I said as I hugged her tightly. Thank you, Emily. Ryan had already been moved to the ICU. We could only see him through the glass, lying still, pale, surrounded by tubes and wires. Ryan, I whispered, tears blurring everything. David stood beside me, silent and rigid, like a statue carved from stone. That night, Emily took Lucas home so he could rest. The hospital hallway emptied out until it was just me and David. Laura, he finally said, his voice carrying a level of despair I had never heard before. Tell me something. Is Ryan my son? My heart stopped. What? I said. What are you talking about? The doctor said it, David replied. We're both type O. Ryan can't be type B. He turned to face me, his eyes full of anguish. So I'm asking you straight. Is Ryan my biological son? Of course he is, I said desperately. Of course he's your son. Then explain the blood type. I don't know, I said, my thoughts racing. Maybe the hospital made a mistake. Maybe it's some kind of rare mutation. Do you really believe that? David said with a hollow laugh. Laura, when you cheated on me, Ryan was already in college. If he's not my son, that means you lied to me from the very beginning 30 years ago. No, I said, grabbing his arm. That's not true. You have to believe me. Believe you? He pulled his arm away. You didn't even know you were pregnant with another man's child. How am I supposed to believe you now? But Ryan is your son, I sobbed. Just look at him. He looks just like you. Like me. David's tears finally fell. Do you know what my proudest achievement has been for the last 30 years? He said. Being Ryan's father. And now you're telling me he might not even be mine. He is, I said, my voice breaking. He has to be. Just then the ICU door opened. A doctor stepped out. He's awake, he said. He's asking for you. We rushed inside. Ryan lay in the bed, weak but conscious. Dad. Mom, he said faintly. Ryan, I said, squeezing his hand. How are you feeling? Okay, he said quietly. Then he looked at David, his eyes full of something heavy and pleading. Dad, there's something I need to tell you. David moved closer to the bed, his eyes already wet. What is it, son? Ryan took a shaky breath and gathered all his strength. Dad, he said, I've always known I'm not your real son. The doctor's words had shattered my world earlier. But this crushed what was left of it. I stood there staring at Ryan's pale face, hearing the words he had forced out. Everything I thought I understood broke apart and rearranged itself into something unfamiliar and terrifying. After saying it, Ryan closed his eyes, completely exhausted. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the room, slow and funeral-like. David staggered backward until he hit the wall. Under the harsh hospital lights, his face looked ghostly white. His lips moved, but no sound came out. I looked at the man I'd lived with for 30 years. I was used to his distance, to the emotional wall he'd built around himself. But seeing his face now, every line carved with shock and raw despair, I finally understood the fragile heart he'd been hiding all along. What do you mean?" David finally whispered, his voice unrecognizable. A nurse, sensing the tension, spoke gently. "He needs rest. You should step outside." But I couldn't move. I was frozen where I stood. Ryan opened his eyes again and stared at the ceiling. "My senior year of high school," he said softly. "I was cleaning out the study. I found your old medical files. My birth certificate. My blood type was listed as B negative, but the school health screening said I was B positive." My head buzzed. I remembered that screening. Ryan had come home that day looking pale. When I asked what was wrong, he'd said he was just getting sick. That was 2006. He was 17. "I secretly got a paternity test," Ryan whispered, a single tear sliding down his temple. The result said the probability of paternity was less than 0.1%. "Dad," he said quietly, "I'm not your son." David's legs gave out, and he collapsed into a nearby chair. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking violently. It was the first time in 18 years I'd seen him truly fall apart. Not silent tears, but deep broken sobs pulled from somewhere raw. That sound hurt more than any accusation ever could. "Who?" David asked, lifting his head and locking eyes with me. "Who was it?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I don't know," I stammered. "I honestly don't know. Before David, I'd had a boyfriend in college, but we broke up 6 months before the wedding. After we married, I was faithful until Daniel 20 years later. There was no way Ryan could be Daniel's child. That left only one possibility. "David," I said slowly, each word slicing my throat. "Before the wedding, I remember something now. My bachelorette party. I drank too much. The memories are blurry. Then a face I hadn't thought about in decades surfaced. Brian Walker, David's best friend, our best man. A week before our wedding, he moved to Europe for work. We never heard from him again. We barely even spoke about him." David shot to his feet, his grief transforming into something sharp and terrifying. "Brian," he said, spitting the name like poison. "It was him, wasn't it?" I couldn't deny it. The timing fit. The blood type fit. Brian was B negative. I remembered overhearing it at a party years ago. "You too," David said, his voice shaking. "Before my wedding. In my own house." "I was drunk," I cried, collapsing inward. "The night before the rehearsal, I was terrified. I drank too much. He brought me home. I don't remember it happening. I swear, I thought it was just a bad dream." "So you married me while you were carrying another man's child?" David laughed, but there was nothing funny about it. The sound that came out of him was raw and terrifying. 28 years, Laura," he said. "You lied to me for 28 years. I raised my best friend's son. I loved him, poured everything I had into him, made him my pride and joy. And now I find out I've been the biggest fool in the world." "I didn't know," I cried, dropping to my knees and clutching at his pant leg. "David, I swear to you, I had no idea. My cycle was always irregular. I just thought I was late. If I had known, I never would have." "Never would have what?" he interrupted, looking down at me with eyes as cold as ice. "Never would have married me? Or never would have had him?" I couldn't answer. The truth was, I didn't know what I would have done back then. In those days, being an unwed mother carried unbearable shame. And David, he was kind, sincere, and good to me. "Get out," he said, turning his back. "I don't want to see you." "David, get out," he roared, his voice cracking with a lifetime of buried rage. I struggled to my feet and stumbled out of the ICU. The hallway was empty, flooded with harsh white hospital light. I leaned against the wall and slid down to the floor, burying my face in my knees. For 30 years, I believed my affair 18 years ago was the greatest sin of my life, a debt I would spend the rest of my years repaying. But now I understood that was only an aftershock, a cruel echo. The real sin had happened long before the wedding, before the music ever played. And I, the one who caused it, had lived in blissful ignorance while stealing 28 years of David's life. I don't know how long I sat there before someone joined me. It was Emily. She gently wrapped an arm around my shoulders. "Mom," she said softly, "Ryan told me everything. He said that no matter what the blood test says, you'll always be his mother. And Dad will always be his father." I looked up at her young face, filled with sadness and strength. "Emily," I asked quietly, "don't you hate me?" She shook her head. "Hate won't fix anything," she said. "Ryan needs both of you. Lucas needs his grandparents. Some things can't be undone, Mom, but we still get to choose how we move forward." Her words should have comforted me, but I couldn't reach them. Did I deserve forgiveness? Did I still have the right to be Ryan's mother, or Lucas's grandmother? 2 days later, Ryan was transferred to a regular room. David stayed by his side constantly. He spoke to no one unless he had to, especially not me. When he looked at me, it wasn't like I was a stranger. It was worse. It was like I was the person who had destroyed his entire world. Every day, I brought food and clean clothes to the hospital, but I never went inside the room. I stood outside, sometimes peeking through the small window in the door. I'd see David sitting beside the bed, holding Ryan's hand as they talked quietly. I couldn't hear their words, but I could see the tears on Ryan's face and the redness in David's eyes as he tried to stay composed. It was a beautiful, devastating sight. A father and son bonded by something deeper than blood. And I was the one who had almost destroyed it. A week later, Ryan was discharged. We didn't return to our house. Instead, we went to Ryan and Emily's place in Chicago. They gave Ryan the master bedroom so he could recover. David and I were put in the guest room. We lived under the same roof, yet felt 1,000 miles apart. That night, I heard a sound on the balcony. I slid open the door and saw David standing there, a cigarette glowing between his fingers as he stared out at the city lights. He quit smoking more than 10 years ago. "David," I said quietly. He didn't turn around. He took a slow drag and exhaled. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "I wanted to hate you. I wanted to kill you. I wanted to burn everything down and end it all." My chest tightened painfully. But Ryan said something to me. He turned then, the cigarette ember lighting his face. He said, "Dad, for 28 years the love you gave me was real. And the love I gave you was real. That has to count for something." The cold winter wind cut through me as I waited for what came next. "So I've decided to let you go," David said, crushing the cigarette against the railing. "And I'm letting myself go too. Can we?" I whispered. "Can we go back?" "Go back?" he repeated, laughing softly, but the sound was empty. "Our entire past was built on a lie. There is no going back, Laura." "Then what do we do?" He was quiet for a long time. Somewhere far away, a train horn echoed through the night. "Ryan needs time to heal," he finally said. "And Lucas is still young. He needs a complete family. So we'll keep doing what we've done for the past 18 years. In public, we're a loving couple. We're Ryan's parents. We're Lucas's grandparents. And at home," I asked, my voice shaking. He looked at me, his eyes empty. "At home we're roommates. Just roommates. This time it's real." Then he turned and went back inside, leaving me alone on the cold balcony. That night I didn't sleep. I remembered him saying those same words 18 years ago. Only now did I realize that wasn't the worst outcome. The worst was this, where even hatred was gone, replaced by quiet routines and mechanical politeness. And I had no right to complain. I had no right to feel sad. This was what I deserved. The days passed. Ryan slowly recovered and began working from home. Every afternoon, Lucas would burst through the door, first into his grandfather's arms, then into mine. His laughter was the only real warmth left in that house. David remained distant but courteous. He said thank you and excuse me. If I coughed, he'd silently hand me a glass of water. But there was no eye contact. No extra words. We moved like two machines, perfectly performing the roles of happy grandparents and a loving couple. Some nights, I heard him cough softly or let out a heavy sigh through the wall. I lay awake, imagining the man who had always carried himself with pride now forced to swallow unbearable humiliation alone every night. And I didn't even have the right to knock on his door and say I was sorry. Christmas came and we returned to our hometown. The house filled with relatives, laughter, and noise. "My goodness," my cousin said warmly. "David and Laura, you two are still so in love. 30 years together, and you look as happy as newlyweds." David smiled and slid his arm around my shoulders, the motion so smooth and rehearsed that no one would have questioned it. "Yep," he said easily. "She's the one for me." I leaned into him, catching the faint, familiar smell of tobacco on his shirt. He had started smoking again. His arm felt solid and reliable, but I knew it wasn't there to comfort me. It was there to prop up a world already cracking at the seams. At Christmas dinner, Ryan stood and raised his glass. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything you've done for this family." He looked at us, his eyes shining. "I love you." David lifted his glass and emptied it in one swallow. I took a sip of wine, but it burned my throat and made me cough. David reached over and gently rubbed my back. The gesture was kind, but his eyes were distant, focused on something far beyond the room. That was when I understood. Some punishments aren't shouting matches or icy silence. Some punishments are quiet space. He was standing right next to me, yet he was already impossibly far away. After the holidays, we returned to Chicago. Life settled back into what looked like calm, until one afternoon in March. David called me into the study. "Laura, sit down," he said. "We need to talk." I took a seat, my heart racing. Sunlight poured through the window, scattering shadows across his face. "I booked a flight to Oregon for next week," he said evenly. "Alone." My stomach dropped. "For how long?" "I'm not sure," he said. "A month. Maybe longer." He met my eyes, but his expression gave nothing away. "I need time by myself. I need to think." "What about the family?" I asked. "Ryan is doing fine. Emily's here for Lucas." He paused, then added, "Take care of yourself." I knew what this was. Not a divorce. Not a clean break. But a slow, quiet disappearance. From the moment he learned the truth, he'd been slipping away. "David," I said, stopping him as he turned toward the door. "If time could go back to the night before the wedding, I would." "Don't," he interrupted, exhaustion heavy in his voice. "In 30 years you've said 'if' too many times. Time doesn't move backward. It only goes forward. The mistakes we made, the damage we caused, it's part of us now. All we can do is carry it and keep going." He reached the door and paused without turning around. "When I get back," he said, "we'll talk about what comes next." The door closed quietly behind him. I stayed seated in the study, staring out at the bright spring afternoon as tears slipped down my face. I didn't know if he would come back, and I didn't know what kind of future he meant. But this time I wasn't begging for forgiveness. I wasn't hoping to undo the past. 18 years ago, I thought the worst punishment was being untouched, living like strangers in the same house. Now I understood that was only the beginning. The real punishment was the truth, once revealed, building a wall that could never be torn down. On each side of that wall stood two people permanently changed by time and lies. And for the rest of my life, I will be paying the price for a debt I took on 30 years ago. Whether David comes back or not, whatever our ending becomes, this is where my story ends.